All right, Web 36. Welcome to callbacks and advanced array methods. So we did touch on callbacks yesterday, but let's do a review today. So we'll start with higher order functions plus callbacks. And who remembers from yesterday, what is the difference between a higher order function and a callback function? Which one receives and which one is passed in? What's the difference between them? Yeah, awesome. Higher order function receives and callback functions are passed in. So higher order functions receive, callbacks are passed in. So yesterday we did the calculator example, but I want to give you a different example today. So how many people here have worked in a restaurant? How many people worked in a restaurant? Or at the very least have, like, I'm sure you've all eaten in a restaurant. Okay, so I'm gonna use this example of a kitchen. So we've got this kitchen. So we're gonna say function kitchen. And we're gonna pass the kitchen some ingredients. We're gonna give it ingredient 1, ingredient 2, and we're gonna give it a specialized chef. And depending on the chef that we give to the kitchen, we might get a different result back. So we're gonna return the chef, and the chef is going to make something different with ingredient 1 and ingredient 2. Okay, so we're gonna make a function called pizza chef. And this pizza chef is also going to get those ingredients, so ingredient 1 and ingredient 2, and it's going to return something. We're going to return dollars. I took $, curly brackets, ingredient 1, and $, curly brackets, ingredient 2, and I made you a pizza. Put an emoji in there for fun. Pizza. There we go. And I need my curly bracket. Okay, we're also going to employ a pasta chef. So function pasta chef. And this pasta chef is also going to get 2 ingredients. Ingredient 1, ingredient 2. We could write out ingredient, but that's a lot of writing. So I'm just writing ing1 and ing2 just to hold the place. And we're gonna return, and I'm gonna copy this same return statement here. And instead of a pizza, I made you spaghetti. We'll do an emoji for that too. Okay, so we've got a couple of ingredients in the kitchen, only a few things. It's a small restaurant. There's not very much on the menu. So we're going to console log, and we're going to take kitchen, and we're going to pass it 2 ingredients. We're going to pass it dough, and we're going to pass it sauce, and we're going to give the kitchen a chef. So either the pasta chef is working that day or the pizza chef is working that day. So pizza chef is working the first day, and then the second day we're going to invoke the same function, and this time the pasta chef is working. Okay, so I'm going to save, and I'm going to run. And the first time I run the kitchen function, the pizza chef is working, and he says, I took dough and sauce and I made you a pizza. Okay, the second time, or the second day, when the the kitchen function is run. This time we're passing it the pasta chef. So the pasta chef is going to say, I took dough and I took sauce and I made you spaghetti. Okay, so in this case, what is the higher order function? Yeah, in this case, the higher order function is a kitchen. And depending on what chef we give the kitchen, we're going to get a different result. So we're giving the higher order function 2 ingredients, and we're giving it either a pizza chef or a pasta chef, and the result is different. Okay, so that is the idea of higher order functions and callback functions. Callback functions are the functions that we're passing in. So depending on which function we provide to the kitchen, pizza or pasta, we're going to get a different result. And the same thing with the calculator, right? The calculator can do adding, multiplying, subtracting, dividing, depending on what operator we give it. So that is the concept of higher order functions and callback functions. Great. Now that we understand this concept, we're going to take this and we're going to use it over and over and over again for the rest of our career as a developer, because everything we're doing today has to do with higher order functions and callback functions. So now we're getting into advanced array methods. Awesome. I'm going to grab some data. So I'm going to go into the training kit and I'm going to grab this const data. It's on objective 2 if you want to go into the training kit or into Canvas and grab this as well. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to bring it here. And I'm actually just going to call this city data because data is super generic, and I'll hit save. And you can refresh that original code pen if you didn't have Canvas open. Okay, so with advanced array methods, we're going to go through 4 of them today. The first one I want to talk to you about is for each. And when we're learning something new, the very first thing we want to do is look up the documentation. We basically want to read the instructions and see, like, how does for each work? For each JavaScript, MDN is a really great resource for looking up documentation on JavaScript. So I'm going to click on the MDN docs, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to read the syntax. So it says array.forEach callback. The first argument that is applied to the callback is always the current value in the array. The index is the second argument if we supply one, but that's optional. The third argument, if we supply one, would return the array, but that is also optional. And then the this argument is optional, so we won't worry about that for today. The return value is also optional in for each. Okay, so what is for each by definition? What is for each? It's an advanced array method, but what is it exactly? We've got something called a callback here. So what is it? Yeah, it does loop, but it takes a callback. So what is that? Yeah, it's a higher order function. So by definition, for each is a higher order function. What is the callback function here? What is the callback? What's the callback? The callback is it's just an anonymous function. So it's right here, it's an anonymous function. It takes as its first argument the current value in the array. Okay, if we look up here, we can see an example of for each, but it's written as an arrow function. Arrow functions are beautiful, but I find when you're a new developer, they're super hard to read and kind of understand what's going on. So I'm going to write this out the long way for us so that we can see what it looks like. So before we write, I'm going to write a few more notes here. So for each, a couple things you need to know about it is that it must iterate through every item in the array without stopping. Okay. For each doesn't return a new array. And the return statement is optional. Okay. It must iterate through every single item in an array without stopping. So that's great, but if we're working with massive data sets and it starts to slow down your browser, maybe a for loop's a better option. Why? Because you can write a condition in a for loop. For each has to iterate through every single item in the array without stopping. Okay, so just a little note there. For each is really great for most things, but sometimes a for loop might be the better choice if you're working with massive data sets and it starts to slow down your browser. If it starts to slow down your browser, that's the key that the data set's too big. Okay, so let's take city data and let's loop through it using for each. And let's console log every state and every city just to see what it looks like. So we're going to say city data dot for each. Okay, function is our anonymous callback function. And then you have this little frowny winky neckbeard guy down here. Okay. In here, we supply the arguments that this anonymous function takes. And the first argument, no matter what we call it, is always going to be the current item or the current value. I'm just going to call it item. Okay, so let's console.log item.city to grab the city name. And let's console.log item.state to grab those state initials. Okay, I'm gonna comment this stuff out up here so it doesn't keep running. Save, clear, run. Okay, so we get Seattle, Washington, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Kansas City, Missouri. Okay, if I supplied a second argument here, it would always be the index. So I can come down here and I can console.log index. And if I clear, save, and run, now I'm going to get the index as well. Okay, I can call these things anything I want. These are parameters. They are just placeholder values. I need to read the documentation because I need to understand that I am using someone else's code. This code was already written for me, and I have to follow the instructions on how to use it. The first argument is always going to be the current value. I can call it unicorn. The second argument is always going to be the index. I can call it sparkles. And I can come here and say unicorn.city, unicorn.state, and I can console log sparkles. And if I clear, save, and run, I still get the same results. Okay. All right, so I'm going to change this back to item and index because that makes a lot more sense. If you call it unicorn and sparkles, the next developer is probably going to come here and say, like, what the heck does this mean? So you want to call your parameters something that makes sense, but parameters, they're just placeholder values. Okay, so when we run the function, let me grab my little annotation tool. When we run the function, item goes here. So in city value, or in city data, it's the current value. So it's going to say like city data city data state, so that the first item here, the first argument is always the current value. The next one is always the index. That's optional. Okay, and how did I know that was optional? How did I know all of this stuff? I looked at the documentation. So if we go back to the documentation and I scroll down to the syntax, like I can see right here that the index is optional. I can see right here that the first item is the current value, the current element being processed in the array. Okay. All right, that is for each. Let's take this one step farther. Let's use for each to loop through this array and return the states in lowercase. Okay, and we're gonna push that to a new array. So if I wanted to loop through this array using for each, grab the state names, convert them to lowercase and push those to a new array, what would be my first step here? What's the first thing I have to do? Yeah, we need to create an array. So we can see right here that for each does not return a new array. So we need to create an array. So I'm going to say let lowercase equal, and I'm going to set it to an empty array. Just going to create an empty array into existence. We could also say const because technically we're not changing the array, we're just putting things inside of it. Okay, so now I want to jump into city data dot for each, okay, function, which is my anonymous callback, item, which is the current value, and I need to return something here. And what am I returning? What does my return statement look like? What am I returning? The lowercase array, how do I, Christopher's got it, lowercase dot push. How do I add things to an array? I can push data to the array. So we're gonna say lowercase dot push. And in this case, what are we pushing? So, yeah, you're answering on the same thread, perfect. Item dot state, yeah. Item dot state, and how do I convert that string to lowercase? Let me get a new thread going. How do I convert to lowercase? There's a method for this. You can look it up if you don't know it. Yeah, dot to lowercase. Okay. How would I check my array? How would I see my results? Yeah, I want to console log my new array. So console.log, and we're going to console log lowercase. Okay, save, run, and we get Washington, New York, Massachusetts, Missouri returned to us in lowercase. Okay, awesome. So that is for each. The next thing I want to talk about is .map. And with map returns a new array. Okay, it automatically returns a new array. It does not manipulate the original. Okay, When you think of map, think of converting data. So the thing we did above, that would have been a perfect use case for .map. And .map needs a return keyword. Okay, and we're going to look up .map as well because it's something new. So we'll say .map JavaScript. Okay. So here's the syntax. Let new array equal array.map. So now we could have done that all in one step. Let new array equal array.map function, which is our anonymous callback function. Current value, okay, which is required, and it is the current element being processed in the array. Next would be index, optional, array is optional, this argument is optional, and a return value is required. Okay, so let's solve that same problem above using .map. Okay, so I'm gonna comment this out so that we don't get that it already exists. So if I wanted to solve this using .map, I don't need to create an empty array because map returns a new array. So I can just say const lowercase equals, and I can go right into my city data.map. Okay, I'm going to say function, which is my anonymous callback function. I'm going to pass it the parameter of item, but I could call this anything I want. I just need to know that it's going to be the current value. And I'm going to return. And now I don't need to push anything because it's automatically doing that for me. It's automatically creating a new array for me. So I'm going to say return item dot state dot to lower case. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to console log lowercase. And I'm going to see what I get back. And I get the same thing. Washington, New York, Massachusetts, Missouri, all in lowercase. Okay, so when you think of .map, think of converting data. So I'd like you all to try this on your own. So I do have a breakout planned for you. I'm going to share this with you. 1 second. Let me just get this up on my screen. And I will send you to your breakout rooms. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. I thought I had this up on this screen. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, or maybe not 10 minutes, maybe 8 minutes to solve this. And I want you to try and solve it with map and for each. And if you're finished early, you can also try to solve it with a for loop. So the nice thing about development, and also sometimes the annoying thing about development, is there's often lots of different ways to solve the same problem. So I want you to try this with map, try this with for each, and if you're feeling really ambitious, try this with a for loop as well, and see if you can get the same results. Okay, so let me put you in your breakout rooms. Okay, go ahead and join those rooms, and I'll call you back in 8 minutes, and we'll do this together. Okay, and we are monitoring who's in breakout rooms, so please make sure you're joining. If you're not in breakout rooms, we can't mark you present for today's guided project. So please make sure that you're joining that breakout room and that you're working together to solve these problems. All right, if you're back early in the main room, let me know how it went on that thread. I'm going to call everyone else back in about 30 seconds.
Sounds good.
Okay, let me call everyone back. Issues with breakout rooms crashing. I might message you after the guided project to get a bit more info on that. I've never had that happen before, so we'll see if we can find a solution there. All right, as you start to filter back in, let me know how that breakout went. Were you able to solve it with for each? Were you able to solve it with map? Were you able to solve it with a for loop? Solved it with map, awesome. Solved it with map and for each, that is great. Perfect. Okay, it looks like everyone's filtering back in now. I'm just gonna pause this. Oh no, it was a dumpster fire. That's not good. We'll do it together. We'll make sure that you have the solutions. Okay, let's go through this together now that everyone's back. So I'm going to show you how I would approach this problem. Okay, so we've got an array full of objects with runners, and the challenge says the event director needs both the last name and the t-shirt size of each runner to send to the designer so that the designer can customize race shirts for them. So you want to combine the last name and the t-shirt size, and you want to populate a new array called shirt order. So first, let's do this with for each. For each. And I know that for each doesn't return a new array. So step one is going to be create an empty array. Okay, and this array, we want this array to be called shirt order. So we're going to say const shirt order equals, and we're going to set it to an empty array. Okay, we know that we need to loop through the array. We need to grab the last name, which looks like last underscore name, and shirt underscore size. And we need to push this to the new array called shirt order. Okay, we know that for each loops through the entire array without stopping. So we can say runners dot for each. Okay, we need to say function, which is our anonymous callback function. And we're going to provide it the argument of item. Okay. We know that for each doesn't return a new array automatically, but we've created this empty array that we can push to. So we want to return something inside of for each. We want to take shirt order and we want to push something to it. What do we want to push? We want to push item dot shirt size. And we want to push item dot last name. Does this make sense? Does this make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay, cool. Let's console log shirt order. and see what we get back. There we go. We've got a new array with a size and a last name, a size and a last name. So now we can send this off to the designer to get those t-shirts made. Okay, a better use case for this would probably have been .map. Why is it better? Because it's not as many steps, right? As developers, remember our goal, we want to be as lazy as possible. Like the least amount of code that we have to write to solve a problem, the better. We don't want to have to repeat ourselves all the time. So with .map, I'm going to call this const shirt order 2, just so that I don't have to comment this stuff out up here. And I'm going to say set that equal to, and I can go right into runners.map. Okay, that also gets an anonymous callback function. It also takes an argument of item or current value. And in this case, we don't need to push anything because it automatically pushes whatever is inside of the return statement to our new array. So we're going to just return $ curly brackets item dot shirt underscore size and $ curly brackets item dot last underscore name. Okay. And if I want to see if this worked, then I'm going to console.log shirt order 2. Okay, I'm going to leave this code up for a second. Let me get a thread going here. Does .map make sense? Does this code make sense, or is there something in this code that we don't understand? So far, so good? Okay, so we're going to save this, and I'm going to clear and run. And we get the same thing back. Okay, so more than one way to achieve the same goal there. We also could have done this with a for loop, but again, like that's even more work. But I'm going to show you what that would look like. For loop. Okay, so in this case, we'd have to say let or const. Yeah, we can use const. Another shirt order equal, and we're going to set it to that empty array. And then we've got to create our for loop. So for let I equal 0, I is less than runners dot length, I plus plus. And then we want to say another shirt order dot push. And in this case, we want to push $ curly brackets, runners. We've got to grab I, and then we've got to say dot shirt underscore size. And $ curly brackets, runners I dot last underscore name. Okay, and then we can come and console.log another shirt order. Okay, so it also works with a for loop. I'm going to clear, save, and run. Just a for loop is a bit more work. So same thing. 3 different ways to solve the same problem. In this case, .map probably makes the most sense. So I would say like with experience, you would probably use .map to solve this rather than a for loop or for each. Okay, does the loop make sense? Awesome. So for loops are awesome. You definitely need to know how to write them. You will probably use them at some point in your career, but array methods for looping through arrays are probably something you're going to use more often moving forward. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna give us a 5-minute break and a chance to get some questions into Slido, and then we're gonna keep going with some more advanced array methods when we get back. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, Web 36. Let's answer some questions. Maxwell's asking, why was it not necessary to invoke the callback function in your city state for each example in order to console log the values? Yeah, good question, Maxwell. So if you think of like what is for each, it's an array method. So just like we don't have to invoke push per se, like it's an array method. So it's automatically running this code here. So if we uncomment that, so when we say city data dot for each, we're invoking for each. Okay, it's a function that's already been written for us, and we're saying city data dot for each. So this is kind of like the invocation is happening here. These are like the arguments that we're supplying it. So it always takes an anonymous callback function, which then takes a required argument of item. Index is optional. So we're technically invoking it here. Does that kind of make sense? Does that make sense? Same with like dot push, like we're invoking dot push here and we're supplying these as our arguments. Okay, so we're supplying item dot state dot to lowercase as the argument that we're actually pushing to the new array. So we're invoking it here. Okay, cool. Awesome. Next question. Can we do a diagram of where things go from top to bottom, then from bottom to top to explain where each part comes from? It helps me visualize it. I know it takes a lot of time, but it helps a lot. I'm not really sure what you mean by a diagram of where things go from bottom to top or top to bottom. I don't exactly know what you're asking me to do here, but I can try to explain again, like how this is working. And I could try to do that by writing out like a skeleton function. So I find that this has really helped past cohorts. So basically with for each, it would be like array dot for each. And then we would have function, which is always our callback function. So I can even say CV function, which is our anonymous callback function. The first argument that it takes is always the current value in the array. And then here we can console log if we just want to see something, or we can return if we want to actually do something with the data. Okay, I'm gonna comment that out for a sec. And it's the same thing with map. So with map, if I were to write like a skeleton of what map would look like, it would be like const new array, because it returns a new array automatically, equals array.map function, which is our anonymous callback function. And then the thing that we have to provide, the argument that we have to provide is the item or the current value. So current value. We can call this anything we want. And then we also need a return statement here. And this pushes to the new array. So whatever we return here is going to end up in this new array. Does that solve the play-by-play? Is that a good play-by-play? Does that make sense? So I'm not sure it would make sense to like draw a bunch of arrows on the screen in this case, because yeah, I'm not sure it would make much sense. So like the current value is like the thing we're using to dot into. The current value would be I in the for loop, right? So we would say like array I dot city, like the current value is taking the place of array I. So now we can just say like item dot city or item dot state instead of saying like city data I dot city, city data I dot state. Now that thing, that current value that we're trying to grab, that is what item is referencing. Let me comment this out. Okay. When you use .map, do you first have to be 100% sure that the elements you're seeking exist, or does .map have some sort of built-in way of catching exceptions? So with all of these array methods, you have to use them, yes, with an array that actually exists. If an array does not exist, they're not going to work because they're array methods. So you have to use them with an array that exists. The things inside of .map, and I think this is what you're asking. So if we scroll over and we read the documentation for .map, the current value is the current value in the array. That has to be supplied as an argument. That is always the first argument, no matter what you call it, okay? And it's always the current element being processed in the array. So the current thing, the current item that we're looping through. So whatever iteration of the loop we're on, it's that item. So that always exists. As long as the array exists, that item exists. Index is optional. So if you wanted to grab the index and do something with it, you could supply that as a second argument, but it's optional. You don't need to supply the index. You could also grab the whole array. So the array that map was called upon, if you wanted to, but again, optional. And then this argument, also optional. Okay, I'll be honest, I don't really use these very often. Like I can't think of a great use case for when I've used these. Index, sometimes, again, not that often. Current value, always, you have to use the current value. Okay, and what does current value reference? So let's go back. So current value in this .map is referencing, so item.state. So every time this loops through the city data, it's grabbing the state. So in this case, the first loop, this is item.state. The second loop, this is item.state. The third loop, this is item.state. The fourth loop, this is item.state. Okay, so it's taking the current value, and that is, that's not optional. That argument always has to be supplied. And the very first thing, the very first argument, so whether you called this item or you called it unicorn, it's always going to be the current value. Why? Because we're using someone else's code, and that is what they've set this code up as. Okay? Does that answer your question? Does that make a little more sense? That answer your question. So you have to use it on an array that actually exists. And then the current value is the current value in that array. So the current value that it's kind of like operating on in that array. So what I mean is if state was left off by accident in just one of the elements, would it give an error? So state wouldn't have been left off. Like this is an array of objects. All of these objects have state. We're grabbing item.state. So every time it iterates through, it's going to take the current value. If for some reason this item didn't have a state, then it wouldn't return anything because it doesn't exist. Okay. So will we be using for each more often than for loops? Yeah, I would say as long as you're iterating through an array of data, unless that array of data is so massive that it's slowing down your browser speed, you'll probably use for each over a for loop. Or map, or filter, or reduce. It depends on really what you're trying to do, what problem you're trying to solve. Think of these array methods as like tools, and everything you're learning, closures, everything you learned about objects and arrays last week, think of these as tools, okay? You're putting these in your toolkit. You're showing up every day to work with your toolkit and you know that you have to solve a problem. The more tools that you have in your toolkit, the better equipped you are to solve these problems. So all of these things are just kind of like tools that you could use to solve different problems, if that makes sense. So you could use a for loop, but maybe the better tool would be a for each. So it depends on the situation. All right, Eric says, when we run the index, are we just checking our work at this point? Why would we want to run the index in real world situations? Or is this just a training tool? Okay, so in this case, when we're running index, I just wanted to show you that the second argument supplied is always going to be the index, no matter what we call it. So again, I'm gonna call it sparkles. Okay, and if I run item console log sparkles, it's gonna give me the index. Let me comment this out so it doesn't run. Clear, save, run. Okay, so sparkles is always going to be the index. So the second argument that we supply, it's always going to be the index, no matter what we call it. It's always going to give us back the index. When would we use it? So for example, I think we wrote a function the other day that would have looped through the array and grabbed an item at a specific index and like changed that item. So that would be like a good use case for it. If you needed to grab an item at a specific index, we could supply the index and say like, if the index equals this, then grab the item and do something with it. Can you explain why string template literals are used in the anonymous function in map and for each from the breakout? Is it for when referencing more than one key value pair? So you can use string template literals anytime you want to. Personally, I like to use them better than just concatenating strings. Okay, so string template literals, they're just a nicer way of writing things. So I could have said, like item, push item t-shirt size, item.shirt size, item.last name. Let's see, I feel like I'm missing something here. Clear, save. Oh, I would need to do this. So this would need to go inside of a string, this, and I would need to add no space there, but I would need to add a space here, and I would need to say plus, clear, save, run. Okay, so I could have done it that way. Personally, I think like this is more work than it needs to be, so I like the syntax of string template literals better here. I think it looks neater, I think it's easier to read, I think it's easier to write. So that's why I've used string template literals there. So whenever I'm concatenating strings, I use string template literals because the syntax is just nicer. The only real difference between for each and map, the fact that map automatically pushes, or is there more than one that differentiates the two? Yeah, there's a couple differences. So what else is the difference between for each and map? So for each doesn't return a new array. Map does return a new array. For each, you don't need the return keyword. Map, you have to use the return keyword. But otherwise, they're pretty similar. So for each, I would say like you need to loop through data, you need to check it out, you need to console log something, maybe you need to do something with it. Map, when you think of map, think of converting data. If you're taking data and you're converting it and then you're pushing it to a new array, map is probably your better use case for that. All right, these are great questions. In the return in the dot for each example, is the return in the dot for each example doing anything? Dot push is mutating the variable array. It shouldn't be returning anything except the length of the new array. What are you asking here, Alice? Which for each example? Is the for each example Is the return in the for each example doing anything? So there's a couple of for each examples with return. If we're looking at this one, okay, if we want to push this to the new array, then we actually have to return something. Otherwise, we're not pushing it to the new array. Okay, so return is like actually do this thing. Console log is like show me what this thing would look like in the console. Okay, so if we want the function to actually do something, we need to return something here. And the same thing is happening here. So we're returning short order dot push, and we're pushing these items. If we didn't have a return in here, this short order dot push wouldn't be happening. We would just be like previewing it. We want it to actually return something. So I think that's what you're asking. Why don't we define item parameter as an argument when we invoke the function? So we are using item as the parameter, and item is taking the place of the current value in city data. Okay, so technically we're defining it like here. We're saying item.state or item.city. So it's taking that current value. Think of this as a for loop, right? If you're looping through city data, so if we wanted to say for let I equals 0, I is less than city data dot length I plus plus. If we wanted to console.log the state, we would need to say city data I dot state. Okay, so now we're just replacing this city data I with item, with the current value. Okay, does that make a little more sense there? We are replacing, does that make sense? So this is item. And then we can dot into anything we want. Okay, let's see some more examples because I think it's gonna make more sense as we continue. I'll comment that out so you have it as a reference. Okay, let's go into filter, which is the next array method that I want to talk about. So filter, when you think of filter, I want you to think of filtering data. So map would be converting data, filter would be filtering data. Filter. And a couple things we need to know about filter. It returns a new array, so similar to map. It does not manipulate the original. Okay, it filters results into the new array. Okay, and it needs a return statement. So let's take a look at filter before we go any further. Filter, JavaScript. Okay, so let new array equal array.filter, callback, element. Okay, now they're showing you that like it really doesn't matter what we call this. Element is the current item being processed. It's the current value. Index is optional, array is optional, that this argument is optional. Return is required, and a new array with elements that pass the test. So what does that mean? Your return statement should be a conditional, basically. It should be able to be equated to either true or false. If it's true, it's going to be returned into the new array. If it's false, it's going to be excluded. So let's take a look at what that might look like. We're going to say const big pops equals, and we'll say city data dot filter function, which is our anonymous callback function, item, which is our current value, And now we need to return something that can be true or false. If true, it will be included in big pops. If false, it won't be included. Okay, so I want to take a look at this city data, and I'm going to look at the population here, and I want to include cities that are over 500,000 people in my big pops array. Okay, so how would I write a return statement that would include cities of over 500 people? What does my return look like? Yeah, so I'm gonna say return. I'm gonna grab item.population because that is the thing I want to look at. I want to look at the population, and I want to say greater than 500,000. Okay, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to console.log big pops. Let's see what I get back. So I get back an array of objects that include Seattle, New York, and Boston. Let's go up and look. Yep, Seattle, New York, and Boston all have populations of over 500,000. Okay, so why didn't Missouri get included? Because it didn't meet this condition. So filter is kind of like a loop, a conditional, and a push all in one, which is kind of cool. Okay, so I can push elements to a new array in one step based on a condition while filtering through or while looping through another array or the original array. But that's pretty cool. So that's filter, okay? So returns a new array, does not manipulate the original. It filters results into the new array. So think of like, when would you use this in the real world? Because that seems to be a common question. So when would this be useful in the real world? What do you think? When maybe would we use filter? Yeah, a search engine on a website, a search bar, searching in a blog. So for example, if you had your blog posts tagged with categories, you could use a method like filter to include all of the blog posts on the page that meet a certain category. Okay, so a search bar, that would be a perfect example of when filter might be used in the real world. All right, last array method that I want to go through with you today, and then I'm going to spend lots of time answering questions, is reduce. And reduce is a little bit trickier because it's different. So with reduce, it returns a value, not an array. Okay. It doesn't manipulate the original. Usually it's used for sums and products. What does that mean? What are sums and products? Can be used for anything. Yeah, addition and multiplication. So usually filter, that is what you will see, or sorry, reduce, that is what you'll see it used for, addition and multiplication. Let me comment this out for a sec. Okay, let's look up the syntax for dot reduce because it looks a little different. Dot reduce JavaScript, there we go. Okay, the reducer function takes 4 arguments. 2 of them are not optional, 2 of them are. So we have array.reduce, callback, which is your anonymous function, accumulator. Okay, that's different. We haven't seen the accumulator yet. So accumulator accumulates callbacks return values. So it takes the current value and the next value that was added to it, it accumulates it, it becomes the updated accumulator, and then the next value gets added to that. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Then it takes the current value. So this time the accumulator is the first argument, the current value is the second argument. Index and array are optional. It also has this initial value. This initial value tells us where we should start the equation. Okay, so where does the equation start? If you're adding something, the initial value is probably going to be 0. If you are multiplying something, the initial value is probably going to be 1 because 0 times anything is 0. So your result will always be 0 if you start your equation at 0 with multiplication. Okay, and return is required. And this gives us a single value. Okay, let's see what this looks like. So we're gonna say const total land area, and we're gonna add up the land area from that city data. We're gonna say city data dot reduce function accumulator. Accumulator, that's going to be our first argument. Item is the current value. And then the initial value goes here. Okay. And first, I'm going to console log some things. So I'm going to console.log. I'll get the string template literals going here. I am the accumulator. $, curly brackets, accumulator. And then I'm going to console.log. I am the current value, $, curly brackets, item. Item dot, we want to grab the land area. Land underscore area. Okay, and then I'm going to return the accumulator plus item dot land underscore area. So I want to add up the land area there. And then it's going to give me a total value. So I can console.log. I am the total land area, $, curly brackets, total land area. Okay. Clear, save, run, and then we're going to talk through this. I am the accumulator 0. Where did it get the 0 from? Right here. The initial value that we've supplied. So we're starting the equation at 0. I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it down so that we don't have to keep scrolling up. Okay. I am the current value, 83.9. That's item.land area on the first loop, 83.9. I am the accumulator, 83.9. How did we get this number? We added 0 to 83.9, gives us 83.9. I am the current value, 302.6, right here, our next value. I am the accumulator, 386.5. How did we get that? We added 83.9, and 302.6 to give us a new accumulator of 386.5. I am the current value, 48.3, right here. I am the accumulator, 434.8 plus, so that is 386.5 plus 48.3 to give us 434.8. I am the current value, 315. And then if we add this last accumulator and this current value together, we get a total land area of 749.8, okay? Let me get a thread going here. Does that make sense? No. Okay, let's go through it again. I'm going to get my annotation tool out here. Okay, we've supplied a current value. The current value's here. This tells the equation where to start. Okay, so the first time that this equation runs, it says, the first time it loops, it says, I am the accumulator 0. So it takes 0, and it's 0 plus I am the current value, 83.9. 83.9. Okay, and then it loops through again. It says, so this is the new total. I am 83.9. So now the accumulator is 83.9 plus I am the current value right here, 302.6. It's grabbing the next value here. Okay, so it's going to add that to 302.6, which is going to give us our next accumulator here. Okay, so that equals 386.5. Okay, the next time it runs through, it's going to say, I am the accumulator, 386.5. And it's going to add that to the next current value, which is this one here, 48.3. 48.3. And that equals our new accumulator of 434.8. 434.8. Okay, so then we take, I'm gonna write it up here because I'm running out of space. Then we take our new accumulator, which is 434.8, and we add this value to it, which is the next current value, 315 plus 315. And since we're finished looping through our array, this gives us our total. Okay, so these two numbers added together gives us our total land area of 749.8. Okay, does that make more sense now? I'm going to grab another thread. Does that make more sense now? Now that we've gone through it like that? Yeah, okay, cool. This one was tricky for me to learn as well. I was like, what the heck is an accumulator? This doesn't make sense. But when you break it down like this, I think it's a bit more clear. So for example, this current value, so if we started this equation at 100 rather than 0, and we clear, save, run, then our first accumulator is going to be 100. Okay, and then we end up with 100 more down here. So instead of 749.8, it's 849.8. So the current value here, that's telling the equation where to start. The reason why I say it's usually 0 when we're adding and usually 1 when we're multiplying, because if we had 0 here, and then we multiplied these things rather than added these things, if I clear, save, and run, we always end up with 0, because 0 times any number equals 0. So 0 times 83.9 is 0. 0 times 302.6 is 0. 0 times 48.3 is 0. 0 times 15 is 0, so it's giving us 0. 0 times 15 is 0, so it's giving us 0, right? Whereas if I started this at 1, clear, save, run, like 1 times 83.9 is 83.9. And then we could do 83.9 times 302.6. And this is probably more like what we're looking for. So just a little note there. If multiplying current, or I guess the initial value should be 1. If adding, it's usually 0. Okay, and this is where the equation starts. So I'm going to change that back to a plus, leave that as a 0. And I'm going to write a little skeleton here because this one I think is probably the most difficult to understand. So it's array.reduce. And then we have our callback. Okay, and then accumulator. Again, like we can call these anything we want, but the very first argument is always going to be the accumulator. The second argument is always going to be the item, okay? Current value. Enter, pull this back so it looks a little nicer. Okay, here we have comma and then initial value. And here we're returning something. Okay, so either accumulator plus current value, accumulator times current value, and it's going to give us a single value. So this is going to give us a single value. Okay, that was a lot of words. I'm going to give us another short break and a chance for you guys to get some more questions into Slido, and we'll answer those questions as soon as we get back. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Let's answer some questions. So Josh asks, when using .reduce, if the callback function can take an accumulator and a current value, and these can be called anything, will this most likely mean that these will be used to pass arrays and objects through the callback in a real life situation? No. So they can be called anything, but they're always the accumulator and they're always the current value. So you're likely not adding a bunch of strings in an object or a bunch of objects together or multiplying a bunch of objects with each other. So this is probably a more real life situation, right? It's usually used for sums or products. So usually you're adding or multiplying something. So what I mean when I say this can be called anything is I can call this whatever I want. Like I can call this Josh, and I can call this lambda. And I can come in here and say Josh and lambda dot land underscore area, and I can call this lambda and I can call this Josh. Okay, but when I run it, no matter what I've called it, it is always going to be, oops, missing something after argument list. What am I missing? This is not valid code. Clear, save, run. Okay, I'm still getting 0 for the accumulator because that is the initial value. I'm still getting 83.9 for lambda.land area because that is the current value. So yes, we can call these things anything we want because they're parameters, they're placeholders. But no, that doesn't mean that we can just like pass anything into them. This is always going to be the accumulator, the first argument. The next argument is always going to be the current value. So no matter what we call it, it's always going to be those things. Let me comment that out again. Does that make sense, Josh? Let me get a thread going here. Does that make sense? So these are array methods. You're always going to use them on an array. But yeah, the first argument is always going to refer to the accumulator. The second argument is always going to refer to the item. Good. Okay, can you show us how higher order functions work? Still confused? Yeah, absolutely. What are you still confused about? So let me get a thread going here. What is still unclear about higher order functions? And lots of times I feel like it's that we like to overthink things, especially with JavaScript. We go into JavaScript, we go into learning JavaScript, and in our mind, we're telling ourselves, this is going to be really hard. And when a concept is too, quote unquote, simple, we try to complicate it even more. Do you know what I mean? So let's see, what are we still clear about? How the callback works. Yeah, so let's go back to our original example. I'm gonna comment that out. I'm gonna go back up here to this kitchen function. So how does the callback work? It works just like any other argument in this function. And I'm gonna get my tool out. So these are all placeholder values. And when this kitchen function is invoked, whatever I pass in as the third argument, it is going to go here. It's going to take this place. Okay. Whatever I pass in as the second argument is going to go here. And whatever I pass in as the first argument, it's going to go here. Okay. So when I invoke kitchen, I'm basically invoking whatever chef I've called in. Okay, so clear. So basically, when I invoke the kitchen and I pass in pizza chef, it looks like this: pizza chef, because that is the third argument. So it's taking this place. Ingredient 1, dough. Ingredient 2, sauce. Okay, so the first thing is passed in here, the second thing is passed in here, and the third thing is passed in here. So that is the same thing as invoking this function. Okay, if I invoke pasta chef, okay, we can see that pasta chef is my third argument here. So now the third argument, chef. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Sorry guys, 2 seconds. There's someone at the door. Let me just give you a quick. Okay, sorry, I'm back. All right. So basically, yeah, we're just passing in, like we're just subbing wherever we see that parameter, wherever that parameter name appears in the function, we're subbing in our argument for it. So this would be pasta, chef, dough, sauce. Okay. In the case of the array methods, which are higher order functions by definition, because they are receiving a callback function, what's happening there is that we've got to use like the arguments that are provided. So think of like there's some code written kind of underneath the hood that we're not seeing here. And the first argument or the first parameter, no matter what we call it, it's always going to be the current item in the array because of the way that person wrote this function. So these are like code templates that have been written for us, and now we get to use someone else's code to achieve a thing. But in order to use their code, we've got to follow their rules, and they've already written these rules. We just need to read them and follow them. And that's why we need to read the documentation. Callback, how to see when a function is a parameter or an argument. So what is the difference between a parameter and an argument? So I'm going to write notes down here. Param versus argument. Okay, so a parameter is a placeholder value. It has no value until the function is invoked. An argument is an actual value that gets provided when the function is invoked. Okay, so if we said function name, and we provided param1 and param2, and we returned hello param2, my name is param1. Param. There we go. Okay, so when this function is invoked, we're supplying arguments. So we're gonna invoke function name down here, and we'll say students, and actually we'll say Brit, and we'll say students. Okay, and if we wanted to see this in the console, we would need to wrap a console log around it. Everything commented out up here. Yeah, should be good to go. Clear, save, run. And then we get back, hello students, my name is Brit. Why? Because the second argument will go here because this matches the second parameter, like this is param2, this is param2. The first argument is gonna go here. Why? Because these things match. Like it's just looking for param1, and wherever param1 appears in the function, it's gonna replace it with this. And for param2, wherever param2 appears in the function, it's gonna replace it with that. Okay, so that is the difference between arguments and parameters. And then what is the difference between using function? Sorry, Joseph had a question about that. Does the higher order function always have to be on top? So it has nothing to do with the higher order function being on top. Higher order functions, if we go up to our notes again at the very top here, higher order functions receive. So our higher order functions receive callback functions as an argument. Callback functions are passed into higher order functions as an argument. Okay, so nothing to do with it being on top. It's just that higher order functions are the functions that receive the callback. The callback is the thing that's passed in. So kitchen receives a chef. A chef is a function. So the function pizza chef is a callback. Kitchen is a higher order function just because it takes chef as a callback function. And then Meg says, what is the difference between using function name, and const function name equals function? They're just different ways to declare a function. So this is called a function declaration. Function declaration. If you wanted to do const function name equals function param1 param2 and then return the same thing, that is called a function expression. Function expression. This is not hoisted. This is hoisted. That's really the only major difference between them. Then if you have, you could also do it this way, const function name equals, you could go right into your parameters. And you could put a fat arrow after your parentheses, and with an arrow function, so this is an arrow function, you don't need a return statement and you don't need the curly brackets because that's implied. So you could just go right into your return here. You don't need the keyword return. Okay, arrow functions are beautiful. There are some times when you don't want to use an arrow function. When don't you want to use an arrow function? There's one like major time when you definitely don't. So when do you not want to use arrow functions, and why? Yeah, and an object is correct. So you don't want to use them as methods. And yeah, it's because of the this keyword. So arrow functions don't bind the this keyword, they pass the this keyword through. That's not a bug in arrow functions, that's actually a feature of arrow functions. So they're not great use case for methods. There's a great article by Wes Boss that says arrow function no-nos. So this one here. Let me share it with you. I usually share it tomorrow, but I can share it today. So arrow function no-nos. And this is like a really great when not to use an arrow function. So there you go. So click handlers, you'll get to that in Unit 2. Object methods, okay, we'll be talking even more about that tomorrow. Prototype methods, we'll be talking more about that tomorrow. When you need, yeah, so basically objects. Stay away from arrow functions and objects, and also click handlers, which you'll learn about in Unit 2. Okay, let's see. Does that clear up your confusion, Harry, about higher order functions and how they work? So, still confused about higher order functions? Tyler says, this isn't a question, but thank you so much about teaching us about these powerful methods. Yes, they make your lives easier, but still good to suffer through for loops before you get to them so that you know how to use a for loop. But yeah, these definitely make your life easier. Okay, I don't think there's a question still about that. Does filter only return the entire object? Can it return the city if the population, whoops, is less than 500,000? I didn't mean to, let me get that question back. Here we go. I'm gonna pin it. No, we could probably return the city. So we might need to, let's take a look at how we would do that. I'm gonna comment this out. Let's go back up to filter. And here we're returning item.population is greater than 5,000. We could put like an if statement in here if we wanted. So we could say if item.population is greater than 5,000, return item.city. So let's try that. So let's say if item.population is greater than 500,000, return item.city. And then let's console log big pops and see what it gives us back. City data is not defined. I need to uncomment my array method. Okay, that's still returning an object. If item return item.city. There's got to be a way to do this. So it's looping through. Let me get back to you. I feel like there's got to be, yeah, there's got to be a way to do that. Let me get back to you on that. I'm going to keep your question pinned so I can come back to it if we still have time, because I do want to talk about today's project. So for now that we are still new, do we stay away from arrow functions? I would ask yourself, like, am I building an object? If you're building an object, yeah, stay away from arrow functions. Otherwise, like, you can use arrow functions. Arrow functions are beautiful. If you feel comfortable using arrow functions, go ahead and use them, just not inside of an object. When using .reduce, would it be possible to add data for only part of the array? Or would we have to use a for loop in that case and set a certain index? I believe that you could probably write an if-else statement inside of .reduce. I don't know if we have time to try it right now, but try to write an if-else statement and let me know in the help channel if that works. I can keep this question up too, so I can try that and come back to it in the help channel. I'm still not understanding how the computer knows what the parameters are without them being passed as arguments, like in .reduce example. Can you go over this again? Yep, I can definitely go over that again. So if we go back to that for loop example. So think of these as being a loop, right? So like, how does the computer know that city data I.state is gonna grab this, right? It's the same thing, like the item is replacing I here. Okay, so saying item, passing in this parameter of item, it's the same thing as saying I. We're telling it which array to operate on right here. We're saying city data dot for each function item. Okay, the first argument is always going to be item. It's always going to be I. And then we can dot into city or state. Does that make a little more sense? Okay, so just like our for loop knows, because we're telling it grab city data I dot state. Here we're saying grab city data item dot state. We just don't need to write city data because this function is doing that for us. Can you explain it on the dot reduce example? It's the same thing on the dot reduce example. So here we're saying city data dot reduce. So we're telling it, go look at city data. We know because we've read the documentation that the first argument is the accumulator. We only know that because we've read the documentation, right? Like you have to read documentation, otherwise you don't know how these things work. So I just want to call that out. That's the only reason why I know how this works, is because I've read the documentation. So, and the documentation is telling me how to use dot reduce. How do I use dot reduce? Well, the first item it's saying is the accumulator, and the accumulator is like the culmination of the previous value plus the current value. And the second argument is always the current value. And I know that only because I read the documentation. And so same thing here. We're telling it, go look at city data and grab the item dot land area. So it's the same thing as saying like city data I land area, for example. Does that make a little more sense? If an item repeats I, then why are we also? So the index parameter is optional, right? We're not using, the index parameter is optional. So we're saying grab, like give us the index, and index is not returning, it's not like, we're not gonna say index dot state. Index is giving us an actual number. It's giving us an actual index in the array, the position of that thing inside of the array. Okay, that one was answered. Can you do another example of callback functions? I think we've done those now. So if you still need an example, let me know in the help channel and I'll give you another example. Feel free to look some of that stuff up too. Okay, so if you're still a little fuzzy about that stuff, maybe try reading some of this documentation and letting us know if you've got some specific questions about that. All right, in the interest of time, I do want to talk about today's project because there is some instructions that you have to make sure you read on today's project. So we're going to go next and click on today's project. Note, this is what I want you to pay attention to. Note, please add the live server extension to your Visual Studio Code and use it for this project. This will make viewing your data easier. This data is in this FIFA.js file. It is something called an object or a JSON object, and it throws us a browser error if we try to view this in the console of our browser. It is a problem with the browser, okay? So in order to fix that problem with the browser, we're gonna download Live Server in VS Code. This is an extension in VS Code, and then you can look at the console right in your Live Server, and it's not going to throw you an error because Live Server parses the data correctly. Our browser does not parse the data correctly. So we're gonna get an error in the browser. So make sure you're downloading this Live Server extension, and then you're gonna go and read through the data a little bit so that you understand like what the data is, and then you can start answering the questions. Notice the keys in this data. Okay, the keys in this object have spaces in them. Let me get a thread going. how do I access the keys in this object? Austin, your link shouldn't be for yesterday's project, so just make sure that you're in the right place. If it's still in the wrong place, take a screenshot, send me the screenshot, and then I'll send you the actual link for the project. Yeah, with brackets. Okay, so here we need brackets and we need quotations. We can't dot into away team initials because there's spaces in there. We need to use bracket notation here to access these keys. Right, and then the exit ticket is on Canvas, so you don't need to do the exit ticket here. Okay, so you're just doing task 1, task 2, and then if you want to do the stretch goals, you can do task 3. Task 2B, your exit ticket is already in Canvas, so you just need to fill out the form in Canvas. All right, let's see if there's any final questions. Okay, Adam and Matt, I will get you an answer to those in the help channel. I just need to figure out how to do them. Okay, I'm gonna stop here, let you go for lunch. Have fun with this afternoon's project, and I will see you later.